Hello, Saliha.
Hi, Celiani. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Great to have this conversation with you. We are talking here about the combination of social construction and design. I know you have been working a lot with these approaches. And my first question to you is, what is the power of this mix? What's the power of combining social construction and design?
Mm-hmm. Excellent question. And thank you again. I love having this conversation with you. I want to start out by first just saying what does social construction mean for me, and I'm not going to do it justice. I'm going to take one aspect, one thread as it connects to design thinking, and that is this idea of social construction, that we construct reality, and the way we construct reality as we know it is a coordinated, negotiated activity. Mm-hmm. So if we take any of those terms and connect it to design thinking, and we could spend half an hour in trying to understand that. The first thing is that design thinking is an activity. It's an activity between people. It's not just in the designer's head or they're doing it by themselves, right? Especially in research, when we think about research, we think as the researcher is the center. Mm-hmm. And as we know, as we do research from a social constructionist point of view, research is also an activity that's made between the participants, the researcher, the people who we are studying with, maybe even the funders, maybe who we are going to write to if you're in a committee or committee members. And in that same way, design thinking has all of these different stakeholders. Mm. And it is so that's the first thing, that it is not a single person's activity, or it's not a singular activity. Mm. Which brings us to a second thing, that it is a coordination then. If there's so many players, how do we come together given our differences? So there's a plurality of ideas there that have to be brought together. And a key both difference and a connection between those two that I would say is social constructionists talk about meaning making as part of coordination. Mm-hmm. Where meaning can be consensus, meaning can be how to go on with our differences, meaning, again, coordinating our meanings. And I think for the design thinkers, they don't talk about meaning, but they'll talk about, especially because they're thinking about designing process, product, or people's experiences, they talk about the goal, right? Mm-hmm. That what is getting constructed as an object, as an experience, or a process. Mm-hmm. But I think it emerges from the meaning that comes together as people are going to be engaging any of those three things. And I want to emphasize that design thinking came from product design, and now it has moved into, especially as we are more focusing on user experience, like using computer, this digital device, like how should the screen be designed, how should the camera be placed, how do we look to each other in a way that we are in a conversation. All that is part of the user experience, but it also centers the human being in that moment, right?
So are you saying that even having different languages, this is one important element that unite both approaches?
In the sense of they are different languages, and I'll come to this in a minute, about some of those differences can create conceptual differences. So people like yourself and me and our other friends, we use it from a social constructionist perspective. I think we make design thinking more in light of social construction, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. I think social construction also provides a conceptual way to understand design thinking, but I don't think design thinking goes all the way into the realms of social construction. Mm-hmm. And a quick example of that, and this is one of the things that I'm writing about in the paper, that's distinctly different, is this idea of design thinking is human-centered. Mm. Whereas I think about social construction as relationship-centered. Mm. So that notion of being oriented to, and relational is a construct of social constructionism, but being oriented to relationships is very central to how we think meaning is made. And we see it play out as a tool, as a way in design thinking, but it doesn't get conceptualized that way in design thinking. Mm-hmm.
So this could be one concept from constructionism that could be offered to design professionals to expand their understanding and their activity in design.
Right. Because the key thing about design thinking is they're making a thing where the person is centered and it's around, right? And we're saying it's between these two. And this is early systems idea in some ways, thinking about two entities and the relationship between. But if you take it forward to what Ken Gergen talks about, that everything emerges out of the relationship, like even the concepts that we're talking of today, then you're not talking about just the person or human being. You're also talking about how the human being is in interaction with the environment. How is the environment in interaction with the animals and other living creatures other than human, right? And all of that becomes part of the person's experience, the object that gets created, or the experiences that get created by design thinkers. So does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And the other way around, something I see happening a lot in design processes is the use of creative tools to help this co-creation happen.
Right.
And in constructionism, I think constructionist practitioners and researchers could take advantage of those tools to enhance their relational process to happen, because constructionists focus a lot on relationship, and the main character in this relationship is language.
Right.
So playing a role of creating meaning. So they focus a lot on conversations.
Right.
And conversations as we talk. And I see designers, they focus a lot on creative ways to engage and inspire people to talk about something.
Right. And that's interesting you bring that in, because as my research, my focus is on creativity and how we as adults play. And that's how I came. I mean, this emerged out of constructionist thinking for me, which is we are constantly creating the world, the relationships, and who we are. We are always in that process of creation. So it's a creative activity of what that means, right? And how to do it. And that's what led me to play and led me to design thinking. And so you're hitting the nail on the head for me in the sense of I came to design thinking looking at how do they do it in terms of the tools, but then realizing that the conceptual that they use, there are some overlaps and certain distinct differences in there, right? And the way we think of language as construction, they think about play as construction.
Exactly.
Right? And so that creativity and that, so it's one can say it's different languages, because when we think about language, we don't think about language as social construction as being representational, but something that has both meaning that is brought in and meaning that's negotiated. So there is play in it. You have to play with words, you have to play with meanings, you have to explore what's emerging. And that's what I think designers do very well. They are looking to connect things that are usually not connected.
Exactly, yeah. And as a researcher, Saliha, I believe constructionism and design can be also a combination in research, especially if we want to develop research that can be not just discovering things, but creating new futures and innovate on some topics.
Right.
How do you combine that in research? Is this possible? How are you doing it?
It's a great question, and it just hits the nail on the head when it comes to design thinking, because I was like, where did design thinking come from? And when you go on to understand, it is a form of ethnography. So it actually, design thinking originates from long form research. Qualitative traditions have informed. So they, when you think about ideating and prototyping and iterating, one can see it as a process of research that is knowledge generating, that culminates in the making of a process, product, or experience. And that kind of like a DNA helix thing, the back and forth of making, which connects back to social construction for a minute, that in back and forth of our interactions, we connect ideas, we create knowledge. In that same way, design thinking is taking ethnography and saying, what are the insights? And I said they take ethnography, they go and embed themselves in processes. If they're redesigning say, the experience of a person coming into a clinic, for example, and they're doing this, I call it lived knowledge, right? That research is not just or traditional research is excavating knowledge, but as we constructionists think, research is making the world as we know it, and it's knowledge fast forwarding, right? And in that way, design thinkers are also taking that knowledge, the insight of observing somebody's experience in a clinic, how they come in, how long is their waiting period, how are they greeted, who talks to them, and they go through that experience in the name of empathy, which is to walk in someone's shoes as a way to understand that. And when they start learning that, they come back and brainstorm, but they also are talking to people. So that's in-depth interviewing they do. So in all of these ways, we see research moving in through design thinking. And they have technical names for it. Different design thinkers with different models will have different names for it. But the basics of it is understand someone's experience from within their, as we call it in social construction, being local. Right? And it's not some abstract concept of how a clinic should work, but how a patient coming into a clinic might feel when they're sick. What feels warm, what feels dignifying, what feels respectful, and how does the patient experience it? So they take those experiences and prototype it and keep doing it till they get to a place which we in result would say a report, and they would say it's a process or a product or an experience. Yeah. So am I answering that question of how I think design thinking is research, really? But it's lived research in the sense of, I call it making lived knowledge, meaning it engages in learning from the experience and then reproduces new experiences, new knowledge, new ways of going on.
Yeah, it makes totally sense. I see designers doing all these processes, and sometimes talking to them, they don't consider themselves researchers. Research is something really far away. And then when you bring this idea of social construction and knowledge construction and creating new meanings and lived experience, then you can reframe what they do as also doing research.
Right. Both are process-oriented. Constructionists are process-oriented. What designers do, the back and forth, going back and iterating, is process-oriented. Research is about that, which is how do we make sense? What do we make out of it? I think often people think about research as what's in the books and in the journals. But if you think about research the way social constructionists think about it, I think it might change designers' mind about what they're doing. And I also think there's one more thing that's happening, which is interesting, just like it's happened in social construction. Things get extracted, things get essentialized, and like we know, social construction people, sometimes they learn it as a technique, and not as a way of being and as a way of thinking and understanding and living in the world. So if you do it as a technique, which is the danger of calling something a tool, then it doesn't embody those spirits. And in that same way, if you understand research as a technique, right, and not the embodiment of what is research, research is co-creating knowledge, then the participatory nature, the way of looking at each other, and one is not the expert, everybody's an expert, and what's their expertise at, it changes. And in the same way, when design thinking is taught as a technique, as a tool, people lose the way of being, the play that I come from. That it's not just techniques, it's that notion of how do I engage people around me, how do I shift from it being about me to we. One of the best questions I love about design thinking is how might we? It's not how might I or how might we? And the we makes it a thing that's a pluralistic, a collective, and it allows for possibilities.
Yeah. Oh, great. Thank you so much for bringing all these new insights. And as a final question, when your paper will be ready?
Well, I don't know. Me and my partner are co-writing it right now, but I'm wondering about the deadline myself. So we'll find out. So there'll be a lot more in the paper about that. So we'll talk further.
Oh, I'm looking forward to read it.
Thank you, Ciliana. It's been a wonderful, it's gotten me percolating for the paper too in a good way.
Yeah, and it really brings a lot of insights here on how this combination might be a powerful mix. So thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Thank you. Have a good
Okay,
one.
you
Bye.
too. Bye.